What would you do if the only thing you had left after your divorce was a broken-down cabin in the middle of nowhere? Julia Morgan never imagined she'd be standing in the pouring rain, staring at a decaying house with her kids shivering beside her, and calling it home. She had $47,000 to her name, a broken heart, and 2 children who barely spoke to her anymore. The real estate ad promised rustic charm. What she got was mold on the ceilings, holes in the stairs, and a smell that could only be described as historic tragedy. Her daughter wanted to go back to the city. Her son asked if the house was haunted. And Julia? She was asking herself one brutal question: had she just made the worst decision of her life? But then, something happened. Behind layers of crumbling wallpaper, they found hand-drawn sketches from nearly a century ago. And then the original artist, an eccentric old woman, showed up at their door with a diary in hand and a cryptic smile. "This house chooses people. And it chose you." What followed was not just a renovation of a home, but of a family, a purpose, and a future no one saw coming. When Julia Morgan signed the divorce papers, she felt a strange mix of numbness and panic. After 15 years of marriage, she walked away with 2 kids, a beat-up SUV, and just enough money in her checking account to either rent a small apartment or take a massive leap of faith. That leap came in the form of a 1920s lakefront cabin listed online for $32,000, cash only, as is, and located in a forgotten corner of Vermont that hadn't changed much since the Eisenhower era. The photos were blurry, but something about it pulled at her. Maybe it was the idea of starting over somewhere no one knew her name. Maybe it was desperation. Her daughter Maddie, 14, was silent during the 3-hour drive. Headphones on. Hoodie up. Her expression somewhere between permanent eye roll and visible disappointment. Leo, 9, had a backpack stuffed with Lego bricks and blind optimism. "Will there be a fireplace? Can we build a treehouse?" he asked from the back seat. Julia lied without hesitation. Probably. When they arrived, the truth hit hard. The front porch sagged like it was tired of holding secrets. The paint peeled off in long, flaky strips. Vines choked the chimney. The front door groaned open like a horror movie prop. And the inside? Rot. Mold. The unmistakable scent of dead rodents somewhere behind the walls. One working light flickered weakly in the hallway, casting long shadows on warped floors. "This is where we're living now," Maddie said flatly, pulling out her earbuds. Julia forced a smile. "It just needs some work." Like an exorcism? They moved their sleeping bags into what used to be a living room and tried to convince themselves it was camping. But the rain found holes in the roof faster than Julia could place pots to catch it. By midnight, 3 leaks became 6. The floor creaked beneath them like it might give way. "Mom," Leo whispered from his sleeping bag, "are we safe here?" Safe. The word sliced through her like a blade. Julia didn't have the answer. She'd bet their future on a property that should have been condemned, and now she had to pretend like everything was under control. The next morning brought more reality checks. The staircase gave way beneath Maddie's foot. She screamed as her leg plunged through the rotting wood. Julia raced over, pulling her out with shaking hands as splinters clung to her daughter's jeans. Maddie was livid. "This house is a death trap. I hate it here. I hate you for bringing us here." Leo stood in the corner, eyes wide with fear. Julia didn't respond. She couldn't. Her throat was closing up, her mind spinning with every expense she hadn't anticipated. Structural repairs. Mold remediation. Plumbing. And the worst part? No one to call. She'd burned through her support system. Her parents had passed years ago. Her friends had chosen sides during the divorce, and not hers. The only person left was her best friend back in Boston, who could only offer support from 200 miles away and through weak phone signals. That night, as the rain returned and the leaks grew louder, Julia sat alone on the porch. Phone in hand. staring at her dwindling bank balance. She had spent everything on this place. The cabin was hers, but so were the cracks in the ceiling, the black mold in the bathroom, and the staircase that tried to eat her daughter. She could barely breathe. The kids needed her to be strong, but she was falling apart faster than the house. Then Leo asked the question that nearly broke her. "Mom, what if we can't fix it? Where will we go?" Julia wrapped her arms around him, whispering the lies she needed to believe. "We'll make it work. We have to." She started cleaning the kitchen at sunrise, using a busted broom she found in a closet. Not because it helped the mold, but because it helped her feel like she was doing something. When Maddie stumbled down the stairs a few hours later, avoiding eye contact, Julia greeted her with a spatula and forced enthusiasm. "Pancakes. Made on the camping stove. Just like when we went to the Adirondacks." Maddie rolled her eyes. "Yeah, except there's no s'mores, no tent, and no dad." The words landed like a slap. By day 3, Julia had duct taped a plastic tarp over the worst leak, boiled water for baths, and taught herself how to reset a breaker box via YouTube tutorials. But every step forward came with a reminder of how alone she was. Leo's optimism was fading. Maddie barely spoke unless it was to lash out. And Julia was still trying to smile through it, trying to keep the fear hidden behind drywall that might cave in any second. Every room she entered revealed a new problem. Every corner whispered urine over your head. She wanted to scream. Or cry. Or run. But instead, she swept. She laid out floor plans. She Googled how to rebuild stairs with no money. She taught herself about permits. And she wrote 3 words on a sticky note above the kitchen sink. One step forward. That night, for the first time, Julia let herself cry quietly once the kids were asleep. The storm outside matched the one inside her chest. But when she opened her laptop to a blank document titled Cabin Resurrection, something shifted. Maybe she couldn't rebuild her marriage. Maybe she couldn't fix everything. But damn it! She could swing a hammer. She could start. And sometimes, that's all you need to do. Just 3 months earlier, Julia Morgan had been living in a perfectly manicured townhouse in a Boston suburb, sipping lukewarm coffee from a monogrammed mug, pretending she didn't hear the silence between her and the man across the kitchen table. She'd spent years trying to keep up appearances, at PTA meetings, company Christmas parties, yoga classes with women who spoke in coded tones and passive-aggressive smiles. When her husband, Grant, left her for a junior associate at his architecture firm, 28, toned, and full of opinions about feng shui, Julia hadn't even cried. She was too exhausted for tears. The marriage had been dying in slow motion, and when it finally collapsed, it didn't make a sound. Just a sigh. Just papers signed in a law office that smelled like pine-scented air freshener and subtle failure. Julia didn't fight for the house. Let Grant keep it with its granite countertops and wine fridge. Let him and Candace or Courtney or whatever her name was fill it with curated furniture and overpriced throw pillows. She took the settlement, $47,000 after taxes, lawyers, and 1,000 tiny cuts, and got the hell out. The suburbs whispered. People asked questions behind her back. Was she the one who cheated? Maybe she just let herself go? What's she going to do with those kids? Julia didn't answer. Instead, one night, after yet another awkward dinner where Maddie refused to speak and Leo asked, "When is Dad coming back?" She opened her laptop and searched. Cheap houses for sale in Vermont. It was a moment of impulse, or maybe instinct. And then she saw it. A 1-bedroom cabin. 1920s, on a lake. 2 hours from anything that could be called a city. The listing photos were awful, crooked angles, grainy lighting, but it was priced at $32,000. Julia blinked. Then clicked. The description said, "Charming vintage cabin with history and potential. Cash only. Sold as is. There were only 5 photos. 2 exterior shots. One of a fireplace. One of a moss-covered dock. And one that looked like someone had taken it mid-fall, the image tilted and blurry, possibly of a kitchen? Or murder scene? She didn't care. It was a space. A beginning. And she needed both. She called the agent the next morning. A woman with a thick New England accent and a lack of enthusiasm. You sure, honey? This one's been on the market 2 years. Roof leaks. No heat. And the foundation's older than your Grey-Tance recipes. Julia didn't hesitate. I'll take it. Sight unseen? Yes. Cash? All I've got. She wired the money that afternoon. Her lawyer called the next day, half concerned, half impressed. This isn't like you, he said. I don't think I know what me is anymore, Julia replied. In a week, she packed up what little they had left, clothes, keepsakes, 2 sleeping bags, a beat-up French press, and the kids, and left the suburbs behind. Maddie protested every mile. You're ruining our lives, she muttered. You're acting crazy. Leo asked if they'd have internet. Julia said she wasn't sure. It was early fall when they pulled up to the cabin. Gold leaves littered the gravel driveway. The air smelled of pine and something older, something almost forgotten. Julia stepped out of the car and stared at the peeling shutters, the sagging front step, and the crooked weather vane that spun aimlessly in the breeze. It looked like it was held together by nostalgia and sheer will. But she felt something else, too. Not hope exactly, something more primal. A low, rumbling need to make this work. She turned to her kids and forced the words out. This is it. Our new start. Maddie didn't respond. Leo looked skeptical. It's kinda spooky. It's got character, Julia said. And a lake. And space. And freedom. Truthfully, it had mold, rot, no insulation, and a toilet that made gurgling sounds like it might be possessed. But Julia had bought it with every penny she had. There were no do-overs. No safety nets. She wasn't here because it was smart. She was here because everything else had fallen apart. And sometimes when you hit bottom, you build a new foundation. Even if you have to do it with your bare hands. It happened on the 4th day. Julia was trying to tear down what used to be the dining room wall, layers of yellowing wallpaper that smelled like mothballs and mildew. Maddie had finally agreed to help, mostly out of boredom. She stood on a step stool, peeling back sheet after sheet of floral print. That's when she froze. Mom, she said slowly, you need to see this. Julia expected mold. Or more rot. Or, God forbid, something crawling. But what she saw took her breath away. Beneath the layers of wallpaper, drawn directly onto the plaster, were delicate pencil sketches, scenes of the lake in winter, children building snowmen, a mother and daughter on a porch with steaming mugs. They were beautiful, haunting, and detailed. At the bottom of one, a small, neat signature. H.G. Lambert. The name tickled a memory. Later that night, after putting Leo to bed and Googling on a painfully slow hotspot, Julia discovered an obscure local blog from 10 years ago. Hazel G. Lambert, the woman who drew her way through grief. She had lived in this very house. An illustrator. A widow. A recluse who had once published children's books in the 60s and 70s but vanished from public life decades ago. Julia leaned back in her chair, heart pounding. The next afternoon, just as she and the kids were setting up a folding table for makeshift dinner, there was a knock on the door. Not the knock of a neighbor. Not the UPS guy. This was soft. Gentle. Timid. Julia opened it to find an elderly woman with perfectly white hair twisted into a bun and a scarf the color of stormy skies. She held a leather-bound book close to her chest. "You're Julia, aren't you?" she asked. "I'm Hazel." For a moment, Julia could only blink. "Hazel. Lambert?" "I heard someone bought the place," Hazel said, stepping carefully onto the porch. "I figured it was time I came back. The house doesn't like being alone too long." She was half whimsy, half witch, and something about her made Julia's heart calm for the first time in days. Hazel glanced around the living room with a nostalgic sigh. "It's more worn than I remember. Then again, so am I." She placed the leather-bound book on the table. "This is the cabin's diary. Every repair. Every storm. Every plant we tried to grow and every raccoon that broke in. It's all in there. I thought you might need it." Inside were pages in faded ink. Dates. Measurements. Sketches. And margins filled with thoughts like storm coming. Nailed the shutters. Prayed it holds. Julia flipped to one page labeled simply, 1973, First Snow Without Arthur. The drawing showed a solitary woman sitting by the lake. Hazel gently patted Julia's hand. "This house saved me once. Maybe it'll do the same for you." It was the first time Julia cried in front of someone since the divorce. But that wasn't the end. Hazel became a quiet fixture in their lives. She visited every Sunday with tea and stories. She gave Maddie a sketchbook and said, "It's okay if the first pages are messy. That's how you start." And then something even stranger happened. Julia had created a private Instagram account just for fun, documenting their renovation progress. She posted before and after shots of rooms, handwritten notes about learning to use a nail gun, and snippets of conversations with Leo about why raccoons don't need names but deserve respect. She had maybe 37 followers. Mostly her old college roommate, her friend Megan from Boston, and 2 bots. Until one morning, she woke up to over 2,000. A local news outlet had picked up her account, called it one single mom's brave attempt to rebuild a Vermont cabin and her life. Apparently, Hazel had quietly shared the account on a community Facebook group. The post went viral in the small-town sense. Moms, contractors, baristas, and even the local librarian started following. Then came the comments. "My grandmother used to visit that cabin. I remember Hazel's drawings from when I was a kid. We've got extra floorboards if you need some." One woman showed up with a basket of muffins and said, "I brought these for the cabin lady. You're a bit of a celebrity now." Julia was floored. She had started this project thinking she was completely alone. But now, it felt like the entire town was watching, cheering, quietly rooting for her. The pressure terrified her. But it also lifted her. Maddie started posting her own sketches. Hazel's influence grew. Leo designed a treehouse renovation plan and posted videos showing off his progress like a proud architect. They weren't just rebuilding a house. They were telling a story. And the world, somehow, had started to care. The storm didn't sneak in. It roared. Forecasts said light showers. What they got was a full-force nor'easter tearing through the valley like it had a score to settle. Julia had spent the morning duct-taping the tarp over the half-repaired roof and pushing sandbags against the basement door, because that was all she could afford to do. The rest was prayer and a bucket brigade system made up of her and Leo. By mid-afternoon, water was pushing up through the foundation. By nightfall, the basement had become a shallow lake. She stood at the top of the stairs, flashlight flickering in her hand, heart pounding as she watched the water rise. The smell of damp earth and panic filled the air. Somewhere under it all, the furnace groaned like it was about to give up. "Mom, we have a problem." Leo's voice rang from the hallway. "I know," she shouted, louder than she meant to. Daniel, the contractor who had slowly become more than just that, had shown up despite the weather. "We need to shut off the breaker." If the water hits the panel, we're toast. Before she could respond, the lights blinked once. Twice. And then darkness. The silence that followed was suffocating. Then, "Where's Maddie?" Leo's voice, small. Nervous. Julia turned, scanning the room. She was upstairs, wasn't she? I haven't seen her since lunch. Panic rose faster than the floodwater. Julia dashed to Maddie's room, empty. Bathroom, empty. Treehouse? But in this weather? No. Please, no. They tore through the house, shouting her name. The wind held back. She's not here, Julia said breathlessly. She's not in the house. Daniel's voice was calm but firm. Check the treehouse. I'll check the road. The rain hit like needles as Julia and Leo bolted outside. Their boots sank into mud as they approached the massive oak. Julia climbed halfway up the ladder, calling out. Empty. Maddie, she screamed. Where are you? No answer. Julia slid back down, face soaked with rain and tears. She fumbled with her phone. 1 bar. 20% battery. Hands trembling, she was about to dial 911 when the front door slammed open. And there stood Maddie, soaked, muddy, shaking. Where the hell were you? Julia choked out. I went to the library. Maddie snapped, voice breaking. I needed to breathe. I needed to get away from this goddamn house. You went out in this storm? My phone died. I lost track of time. You don't get to yell at me like I'm a child when you're the one who dragged us to this dump. Leo stood frozen behind them, holding his flashlight like a weapon. Maddie's eyes blazed. You ruined our lives, Mom. The words cut like glass. I didn't ask for a new life. I didn't ask for this rotting house. I didn't ask to be the kid of a woman who decided, let's run away and pretend we're okay. Julia's lip trembled. Her hands clenched into fists. You think I wanted this? She shouted. You think I had options? Your father left. He left all of us. He gets a clean start with a new girlfriend and a perfect condo while I'm bailing water out of a damn basement just to keep us alive. Then maybe you should have stayed. Maddie screamed. At least I had a life there. Daniel stepped into the room, wet and quiet. He didn't say a word. He just handed Leo a dry towel and walked him upstairs. Julia stood in the wreckage of her living room, rain dripping through the ceiling, the basement filling with cold water beneath them, her daughter sobbing on the floor. She wanted to scream again. Or leave. Or crawl into a corner and disappear. Instead, she sat beside Maddie, knees soaked. I'm trying, she said quietly. And I know it doesn't look like it. But I'm trying harder than I've ever tried for anything in my life. Maddie didn't answer. But she didn't run either. That night, they lost power for good. The basement reached 6 inches of water. The floorboards warped. 2 windows cracked from the pressure. Julia stayed up mopping with old towels, checking on the kids every hour, watching for sparks or sounds from the furnace that might mean it was about to explode. By morning, the storm was gone. But the damage wasn't. The house was soaked. Broken. And for the first time since they'd arrived, so was Julia. Everything she'd held together with duct tape and denial had finally snapped. And all she could do was sit on the kitchen floor, head in her hands, wondering, what if I made a mistake I can't come back from? The day after the storm, the sun returned, too bright and indifferent to the chaos it followed. Julia woke stiff-necked on the couch, still wearing her muddy jeans. The power was out. The kitchen smelled like mildew and regret. She stepped into the basement and stared at what used to be dry storage, now a swamp of silt, ruined boxes, and a bloated water heater that hissed with every drip. Leo appeared beside her in his pajamas. "We're gonna fix it, right?" She hesitated. Then came the knock. Not one, but three. When she opened the door, Daniel stood on the porch with a quiet smile. And behind him, neighbors. Strangers. People she'd never spoken to. Linda from the hardware store with industrial fans. Jim the retired plumber with a toolbox and coffee. A high school art teacher with paint rollers and tarps. Word had spread. Not just about the storm, but about the woman trying to bring an old house back to life, with 2 kids and stubborn courage. Hazel had made some calls. Apparently, the whole town had been following their renovation story online, quietly cheering them on. "You don't have to do this," Julia whispered. "We do," Linda replied, handing her a muffin. "That's how it works around here." And so they did. Fans buzzed in every room. Someone patched the cracked windows. Others helped drain the basement and haul debris. Julia tried to apologize for the mess, the chaos, but no one seemed to mind. "You should see my place after Christmas," Jim grinned. By afternoon, Maddie came downstairs, skeptical but curious. The art teacher introduced herself and said, "I saw your sketches on Instagram. You have a real eye. We have an after-school art club. If you're interested." Maddie blinked. Then nodded. Just slightly. Leo gave tours of the half-finished treehouse. Hazel brought hot cider and stories of blizzards past. And Julia? She stood in the middle of it all, stunned. Grateful. Holding back tears as she watched people fix things she thought were broken beyond repair. That night, the lights came back on. The house hummed again, not just with electricity, but life. Maddie spent the evening quietly sketching at the kitchen table. Leo built a Lego model of the house, complete with the leaky roof and treehouse tower. And Julia pulled out her laptop. She opened Canva. Designed a logo. Registered a domain. Second Chapter Studio. Graphic design for small-town businesses. Logos. Websites. Branding. She had done it for others for years. Now she'd do it for herself. Within days, referrals rolled in. The local bookstore needed a website. A bakery wanted a fresh logo. The hardware store asked for a new flyer. Word spread quickly. People liked working with someone who had dirt under her nails and stories behind her eyes. She understood small-town heart. She designed with empathy. Her Instagram following doubled. Then tripled. A local magazine reached out, "We want to feature you, the woman who rebuilt a cabin and a life." And through it all, the house changed. The soggy basement dried. The walls stood tall again. And so did Julia. One night, as she finished a pitch deck by candlelight, Maddie sat beside her with a drawing, a portrait of the house, restored, glowing, windows full of light. "This is what it will be," she said. "No," Julia corrected, voice cracking. "This is what it already is." Thanksgiving arrived on a crisp November afternoon, the kind where the air smells like firewood and pie crust. The house wasn't finished. Not even close. The floors in the hallway still creaked. The guest bathroom had no mirror. And the dining chairs were a mismatched patchwork of thrifted finds and folding metal. But it was theirs. And it was ready enough. Julia stood in the yard watching string lights sway gently between the old oak tree and the newly repaired back porch. Leo had helped hang them, nearly falling off a stepladder twice. "These lights make it feel like a festival," he'd said, beaming with pride. Maddie arranged napkins at the long borrowed table, her sketchbook never far from reach. Hazel brought a casserole and a bouquet of dried wildflowers from her garden. Neighbors drifted in, each carrying something warm, homemade, or meaningful. Daniel arrived last, arms full of pies, toolbox in hand, and something else wrapped in a painter's drop cloth. He leaned in quietly. Mind if I install your early Christmas present? Julia raised an eyebrow. You brought me another broken pipe? Close, he grinned. Come see. They walked to the front door, now painted sage green with black iron hardware Julia had found at a flea market. Above it, the transom window had been boarded up since they moved in. Until now. Daniel unwrapped the gift, a stained glass panel in amber, forest green, and ocean blue. A sunrise over water. A maple tree in full flame. Tiny, careful pieces forming a window that didn't just fit, it belonged. You made this? She asked, stunned. He nodded, suddenly shy. Started after the storm. I don't know, something about the way you kept showing up. It reminded me of what this house could be. Together, they installed it. And when the last screw was turned, the setting sun hit the glass just right, casting soft, jeweled colors across the floor like the house itself was exhaling after a long, hard winter. Maddie gasped from behind them. It's like the house finally opened its eyes. That evening, under the string lights and an almost full moon, 20 people gathered around the table. The food was simple, the wine boxed, the laughter abundant. Leo gave a mini speech thanking the town, the treehouse, and the people who brought towels when we were flooding. Hazel raised a glass, to old houses and new stories. And Julia stood at the head of the table, heart full. I don't know how to thank you all, she began. When we got here, I thought I was saving this house. But the truth is, this house saved us. This isn't just a renovation. It's a restoration of hope, of trust, of family. We didn't just fix walls. We rebuilt something much harder to measure. Daniel caught her gaze and smiled. Maddie squeezed her hand. Leo slipped a drawing into her lap. It was the cabin, lit up from the inside, with the words "We live here now" scribbled underneath. After dessert, Julia sat on the porch swing wrapped in a thrifted quilt, watching flickers of candlelight in the windows. The house looked nothing like it did when they arrived. But the biggest change was inside, under the new roof, beside the stained glass, behind the laughter. Later that night, when the guests had left and the kids were tucked in, Daniel lingered on the porch. It's not just a house anymore, he said softly. Julia nodded. It's a home. And so are you, he added. She looked at him, really looked. Not as the man who showed up with a toolbox, but as someone who had become part of the story. I think we all are, she whispered. As they sat in silence, the wind moved gently through the trees, and the cabin glowed behind them. Not because of what had been restored, but because of what had been reborn.